Alan, welcome to the Smart Nutrition Made Simple show. What's good, brother?
Thank you so much for inviting me on, Ben. Really happy to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure and honor having you on. I'm really excited for the opportunity to chat. And, we were just talking and probably could chat all day about just all of our experience in the field and the length of time that cumulatively we've been in the industry and all of the people that we're invariably connected to. So it really is an honor to have the opportunity to chat, but obviously as an individual, but really the purpose of having you on is talking about your book, Flexible Dieting, a science-based, reality-tested method for achieving and maintaining your optimal physique, performance, and health. This is what seems to be somewhat of a Bible of nutrition and sort of application information. I should say a science-based nutrition application book. I would love to know what was the impetus for you writing this book and sort of segue into what exactly flexible dieting is.
Sure. The original book that this was kind of not necessarily modeled after, but was kind of the natural evolution from, was a book I wrote in 2007. It was a self-published book called Girth Control. That's a hell of a title, I know.
Nice title, yeah.
But that book was, the aim was to just discuss all the things I felt were important about nutrition as it applies to fitness. So as it applies to improving body composition and athletic performance. And that was a self-published book. It was written 15 years ago, well, almost 16 now. And so I really needed to update it like 10 years ago. I needed to update that book. But just got so busy with work and, the march of your career and
Right.
the obligations that hit, it just never got done. And in 2014, I did a book with a gentleman named Lou Schuler, who is a really good writer, really good journalist. And I wrote the name of the book. The title of the book is not nearly as good as Girth Control. It was titled for us by the publishing company Rodale. They said, you guys are going to call this the Lean Muscle Diet. And Rodale is the Men's Health publication. So they're under that, they're the umbrella for that. I hated the title of the book, The Lean Muscle Diet. And I even expressed to Lou, I said, hey, man, is there any way around this? Can we change the title? And Lou said, well, Alan, here's the deal. We're striking a compromise. They want to title it because it's got all the buzzwords. It's got lean, it's got muscle,
Right.
It's got diet in the title. They think it's a great title, and they're not going to touch us as far as the content of the book. They're not going to mess with us at all. Free reign, full control over the content. So it's just that they want a title. I'm like, okay. So every time I talk about the lean muscle diet, it just makes me cringe, the title of it. So anyway, that was a good book. It was a good book. It was a collab between Lou and I. We put it together in a kind of a short period of time. And it's good. It's not great. Some people do think it's great, and there are elements of greatness in the book, but I would say it's good. Oh, no. It's mainly good because of Lou's writing, not necessarily because of anything else.
Fair enough. I don't know if you give yourself enough credit, but now you have perhaps redemption in your newest book. So talk to us about flexible dieting. I guess, are you happy with the name? And then obviously we should talk about what flexible dieting is.
Yeah, dude. That's kind of a similar story too. So about 2.5 years ago, my friend Brett Contreras of Glute fame,
right?
He gave me a call and said, Alan, I need you to do me a favor. I have a friend in the publishing industry, Glenn Cordoza. He's one of the upper execs at Victory Belt Publishing. And Victory Belt published Becoming a Supple Leopard by Starrett. They also published other big
Yeah.
books like the Paleo Thingy by Rob Wolf,
Rob Wolf. Yeah.
and a bunch of big keto books as well. And he's like, Alan, they want you to write the book on flexible dieting. So we basically agreed that you're the guy to write this book, not one of your students who is just going to be regurgitating you. And there's a lot of them. We want you to write it. And I'm like, oh God, here we go with another book called, with this kind of soundbite, buzzword title, flexible dieting. And Brett insisted that it was titled flexible dieting. And I struggled with that a little bit because I would rather have named it something boring and direct or something really funny like birth control. But I feel like the title flexible dieting, it encompasses it well, but it also is misleading in the sense that people think it's a diet book when it's basically a readable textbook on evidence-based nutrition for improving body composition and athletic performance and health, to a degree. Health is always going to be tied in there. So that's really the book. It's the book that you can build a nutrition certification off of, basically. It's that level of density and information and flow and comprehensive coverage of the elements and putting the elements together and understanding things from kind of a foundational standpoint all the way to the application. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what flexible dieting is.
To be fair, I do think I like the name, and I think that for what it's worth, I mean, listen, from a marketing standpoint, you have to have some sex appeal when it comes to the naming of a book. So I'm gonna support Brett on this one.
Okay.
But obviously, the quality of the material speaks for itself, and like you said, it really does lend itself to kind of be somewhat of a textbook, as I alluded to, the Bible of kind of evidence-based nutrition, if you will. And so I guess with respect to this flexible dieting approach, with respect to this individualization approach, which is a lot of what you touch on throughout the book, what is kind of the main tenets that you could talk about here that would help someone differentiate between, and I'm just going to say dieting for lack of a better term, but between this dieting approach and some other quote unquote dieting approach?
I guess the big difference really is the concept that there's no single best magic bullet type of dietary pattern or protocol that's going to work for everybody, that's going to be effective for everybody, and that is even going to benefit everybody. So that's the thing about nutrition, is it's highly individualizable. And so, like, just to give an example, there are a lot of books out there saying this is the ketogenic diet, and this is the diet that's going to solve all your problems, whether it's weight loss or whether it's this condition or that condition. Keto is it, the ketogenic diet. So my book would basically be the antithesis of that message. So flexible dieting says there's a very wide range of macronutrient distributions that work equally well as long as you can stick to it. But individuals vary in their goals and preferences and tolerances and capabilities to stick to a given dietary paradigm. So therefore, you have to tailor it to the individual. So while some people, according to the scientific literature, a minority of people can stick to keto, that's the diet that they should be on if they do prefer it, and it does click with their goals and their preferences. And on the other end of the spectrum, if somebody prefers a high carb, low fat diet, and that's what they can adhere to, well, then there you go. Right. That's what's appropriate for that person. And so That's one of the aspects of individualization that you can apply to diet, is the individualization of macronutrient distribution or macronutrient breakdown, macronutrient composition. That can be individualized. And so that right there is a complex avenue to go down, because there's different goals that people have. People have different body composition goals, whether it be gaining weight or losing weight. Well, technically gaining muscle or losing fat.
Right.
And people have different athletic goals, whether the athletic goals are very casual, recreational, or whether they're competitive in either the strength or the endurance or the mixed sport, team sport realm. And that's when you really have to kind of individualize macronutrition, especially the carbohydrate element of that stuff. So there's just no way you can tell everybody that keto is the way to go for everybody, right, or this particular variant of intermittent fasting is the way to go for everybody. Right. And if you want to lose weight, you got to shorten your feeding window to X hours and position the feeding window from X to X time in the day. Otherwise, you're messing up. All of that stuff is individualizable. It's customizable. And there's enough literature to basically obliterate all of these universal prescriptions that are constantly dished out in the diet world, and all of these positions people have that, this diet is the best diet. And yeah, there's different things. There's a whole list of things you can individualize in the diet.
That was very, very well said. The problem, Alan, is that if I don't get myopic and dogmatic about my nutrition approach, it makes it a lot harder for me to market my program and sell my supplements. Right. So I feel like 100% a joke, by the way, but I feel like that's really what potentially makes this flexible dieting approach so seemingly difficult to sell, right? To help people buy into, because any answer to the question of what should I do is it depends on all of the myriad of things that you just talked about. What are your goals, and what's your current calorie intake, and, fat loss or muscle gain, and all of these types of things, and nutritional preferences and readiness for change, and right, all of that type of stuff. And I imagine it's so much of it's certainly frustrating for me, and I talk about it a lot on the show, but I imagine it's certainly frustrating for you as well, coming from this science-based approach, not only, but also anecdotally, having been in the industry and coaching individuals for years and years, 25 years, it's probably equally, if not more, frustrating for you.
Yeah, it is. You just can't soundbite nutrition recommendations. You just can't universalize nutrition recommendations for everybody. And you're right. When you do have to ask, what are your personal preferences and what are your goals? It opens up a can of worms, because then you can't just write a nice, neat, you can't make these bold claims that can go viral and, draw in the views and the revenues. And
and it's hard because we're led to believe that there is potentially a one-size-fits-all approach, and that it can be simple or it can be easy, and it doesn't have to take a tremendous amount of effort, and it can be aggressive fat loss, and all of these claims that, are unsubstantiated and or are unsustainable at the end of the day.
Yeah. And what really kind of makes things complex, Ben, is that I made the decision to cover a lot of ground in a very broad range of goals in my book. I made the decision to cover muscle gain, fat loss, and athletic performance in the book. So technically you write 3 separate books out of those things. But I chose to put it all in the book. So that's kind of the issue with my book is that it's really kind of this whole a biblical manual of dietary programming for a range of stuff. So, yeah,
it's definitely a compendium of solid information, though, and I think it's applicable for everything from the general population to coaches, and to those in the industry. And I have every intention of having a copy for all of my coaches for us to be able to reference, because you do a great job of just breaking things down into simple, I'll say sound bites, simple pieces of information that are really the most important piece of information for us to be able to implement. You're welcome. And thank you for putting it together, because I do think the industry needs something like this. With that said, one of the things that you talk about early in the book is rigid dietary control versus this flexible dieting approach. And so what we've kind of been alluding to here is the, promise of these easy, aggressive dieting plans that invariably do require some element of rigid dietary control. I'd love for you to touch on exactly what you've seen in the industry, what the research says about rigid dietary control. Like, what is that versus this individualization, this flexible dieting approach?
Okay. So in the beginning, when you go back in the literature, flexible versus rigid dieting, that work really started in the 90s, and flexible dieting really comes down to a style of dietary restraint. So they call it a cognitive style of dietary restraint or control. So there's flexible dietary control and there's rigid dietary control. And there was a series of studies that compared the two styles, where rigid dietary control was a very dichotomous approach to how you view foods and how you view dieting. So it's very black and white, all or nothing, good foods, bad foods, and the implications are angelic foods are evil foods. Right. And just very all or nothing type of approach. And flexible dieting is more of a flexible view of foods and dieting. So it is not all or nothing. There is room for, there's a margin for gray area. So it's not everything is black and white with flexible dieting. Not everything is all or nothing. If you mess up on your diet, you didn't fail, and you didn't, you're not permanently off the wagon. You can just get back on the wagon and keep going. And with flexible dieting, the concept of good foods, eat all the time, bad foods, avoid at all costs, that turns out to be a counterproductive mindset towards food and towards dieting. And lo and behold, people who harbor dichotomous thinking about foods and about dieting have greater failure rates and lesser chances of properly controlling body weight. And they have higher probabilities and higher risks for disordered eating. And so this has been a consistent theme in the literature throughout the last 2 or 3 decades that basically has demonstrated over and over again that flexible dietary approaches, non-dichotomous thinking, is a much more practical and sustainable approach to dieting. And so within the last decade or so, there's this erroneous conflation of flexible dieting with counting macronutrient grams. So that's another sort of interesting sidebar where, counting macronutrient grams has elements of flexible dieting in the sense that there hasn't been this sort of rigid restriction of food selection, right? So that's the flexible side of it. But the rigid side of it is you got these 3 targets to hit in the day, and you're micromanaging your intake, and that can for some individuals that can lead to pathological type of outcomes.
Yeah. So it invariably, it ends up being rigid dietary
it
control,
ends up being
psychologically
rigid, right?
speaking, for a lot of
Yes.
people. And
Yep.
so where do you differentiate between this rigid dietary control, flexible dieting, and tracking calories? And
yeah, dude. Yeah.
right.
Great.
Compared to other forms, and we can go down this rabbit hole a little bit, but to other forms of calorie control. And I'd love to know your approaches. So we fully understand, like, listen, at the end of the day, regardless of what methodology we're using, flexible dieting, keto, whatever it is, intermittent fasting, it's like, we have to have some element of caloric control, right? Especially if we're working to lose weight, which the name dieting implies. And I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of people that are listening and reading your book are probably interested in some element of weight control, weight loss, body fat loss, body composition improvement. And so I don't think it's wrong to go down this road, but understanding, okay, well, within caloric control, there's a number of methodologies, calorie tracking being one of them versus some of these other methodologies. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. If we go back to the original principle of flexible versus rigid dietary control, then we can take the concept of flexible dieting to, I guess, the highest level, and view flexible dieting as the flexibility of the dietary approach, to the degree that we can look at all of these different approaches, whether they're highly granular and quantitative approaches, all the way to the very loose and subjective and qualitative approaches. Those are all under the umbrella of flexible dieting. So depending on the individual you are, depending on your psychographic, depending on your goals, depending on your tendencies and proclivities, it's like you are fully welcome to be the human calculator and track everything, if that's what motivates you and if that's what nurtures positive outcomes in your life. And conversely, if you're somebody who is repelled by the idea of micromanaging everything, and you would rather build certain habits and certain qualitative aspects that are conducive to your goals, then that's the route that you should take. And I'll even add a third thing in there. There are certain competitors where, depending on the season, they need to clamp down and get highly quantitative and very micromanagey and very rigid with their programs, like, for example, pre-contest physique athletes. And then in the off season, it's a bit looser and a bit more qualitative and less granular and micromanagey. So really, flexible dieting is flexibility of the approach.
You make a really good point in that, because it seems that people want kind of an all or nothing approach and say, well, I shouldn't have to track calories, and I should still be able to lose weight and eat what I want and have this degree of quote unquote flexibility and freedom to do what I want. And right, versus no, you have to, right, be extremely rigid. And I think it lends itself to, well, what and how aggressive, like, where are you now? What's your progress look like? How aggressive are your goals? Because I think we have these unrealistic expectations around what is reasonable and what is unreasonable relative to what you're willing to commit to. And you want to get, sub 10% body fat and feel like you can just intermittent fast your way there or keto your way there, maybe for a very small percentage of the population. But wouldn't it be more reasonable to apply a tool that is going to help you get there faster and have more control, perhaps even within that flexibility over the process? So I don't know. I mean, does that make sense, what I'm saying?
That absolutely makes sense. And that goes back to the diversity of goals that people have. People with more general and casual goals, some of them are going to love plugging macronutrient grams into an app, but really most of those folks don't have to. As long as you recognize the principle that, like, if somebody, for example, has 30 pounds to lose, if they recognize the principle that if my goal is 30 pounds lighter, I need to be consuming the maintenance amount of calories of that 30-pound lighter person. And of course, factoring in what my activity level is going to be. And so therefore, the big picture objective is to eat less than I'm eating currently to maintain my 30 pounds heavier self than where I need to be. And as long as they have that in mind, and as long as they know that there are many ways to achieve eating less, there are quantitative ways where you plug in every gram into an app. And there are a bit more subjective and qualitative and default ways where you can just pull some simple tactics like drinking more water to displace stomach space that you would have filled with energy dense foods, eating more protein to increase the satiety and hunger control of the diet that will default you to eating less of the other stuff that may be more energy dense and or not conducive to weight loss or fat loss. And of course, there are other approaches as well that are a bit more extreme where you're avoiding entire food groups.
Right.
But you have to, it is important to know in the back of your mind that the objective is to eat less for people who need to lose weight. If you know that in the back of your mind, and you know that all these tactics that you employ are all they're going to do is enable you and corner you into eating less, then you need to find the road to eating less that is most sustainable and doable for you as an individual. And like counting calories, a lot of people hate the idea. And a lot of people even more hate the idea of counting macronutrient grams. And so there's ways around that are not as granular and quantitative, but still work really well, because there's no way we can track our energy input and output down to the calorie every day, no matter how many devices we get or we wear, and no matter how closely we think we're tracking everything. It's just it's unachievable to track everything. And so I like to put people on the experiment. Like when they start getting stressed out about tracking, I like to challenge them to not track for a whole month and just kind of go by feel and eat according to hunger and satiety cues, and let's see what happens for a month. Lo and behold, the body is so amazing at just staying the same that they just stay the damn same for the month. So there you go. You're nothing's going to fall apart if you stop tracking.
Right.
Now, over time, depending on life circumstances and what sort of trend you're creating, and then certain changes can happen over the long term, good or bad. But people have this idea. Some people have this idea in their mind that they need to slave over the quantifying aspect of dieting, and really the body has its own checks and balances and auto-regulatory pathways that really sort of dovetail into us staying the same. So
yeah, it really is quite fascinating how that works, regardless of whether you're tracking or not, whether you're training, the type of training that you're doing in terms of that auto-regulation. It really is quite fascinating when you really start to work with people and you start to see all of these nuances of how they respond. With that said, and despite the fact that, you've got this book with all of the scientific references, I think we can agree that, and what I'm hearing you say is that at the end of the day, certainly it's much more behaviorally driven. It's much more psychologically driven around helping someone establish more awareness around what it is that they're doing consistently in whatever way resonates with them. And I think there's room within this quote unquote flexible approach. I do think and think it's warranted to weave in all of the experiences that people have often had with these regimented dietary routines to say, if you did keto for a period of time, we fully understand and hopefully we can acknowledge that perhaps it didn't work for you, or maybe elements of it worked for you for a period of time that you enjoyed, and what did you not enjoy about it, and what can we kind of take from it and apply? Perhaps there's elements of intermittent fasting, perhaps there's elements of whatever, right? Whatever it is. At the end of the day, what becomes most important is that we are, again, we're creating awareness around how we're controlling for calories, and how we are creating some level of accountability through this process. And one of the things that I appreciate with respect to sort of this tracking approach is helping, and that you mentioned in the book, is it doesn't have to be like either when you're tracking, you have to be tracking every macronutrient up to the macronutrient gram. It could simply be setting a calorie ceiling. And this is one of the things that we firmly practice within our coaching methodology, is there's all of these nuances of tracking. It could just be a calorie ceiling, right? It could just be tracking for the sake of tracking with zero acknowledgement or preconceived notions around what you should be or shouldn't be doing.
Yes.
Right. There's a lot of value to that. In fact, we often see, just by virtue of doing that, people, they realize what they're doing. There's accountability built in, and they start to make better decisions. We could have a calorie ceiling and a protein minimum. We could just have a protein minimum. So I think, to be fair, when people are averse to tracking, well, for one, I'll say personally, I believe that everyone should have the opportunity, assuming body composition, weight loss is the goal, fat loss is the goal. I believe it can be a very, very valuable tool. With that said, we fully acknowledge it's not for everyone, but within that, obviously, there's a lot of room for individualization. Absolutely. I should say.
Yes. Even within the bubble of tracking, like you mentioned, there are different ways that you can track. There are different degrees of comprehensiveness in the tracking process. And a lot of, and people click with different points on that spectrum. Like you mentioned, just tracking protein and total calories, for example, is a very effective, in my observations, a very effective method that kind of falls right in the middle of either just, very loose qualitative stuff, and then just tracking every gram of all the macronutrients and stuff. It's sort of in the middle, and it allows flexibility for people to kind of get the non-negotiables done, calories and protein, and then the flexible negotiables, which really are carbohydrate and fat, depending on personal preference and goals and stuff. That can be flexible from, week to week, day to day, even. And so that's one way to do it. And even just having an awareness, and you can wean kind of off of tracking for those who have a desire to get off of the tracking train. There's ways to do that. And one of the stepwise approaches would be to go from tracking all the macronutrients to just tracking protein and calories, to just having an awareness of protein, to then just kind of having an awareness of what sort of ranges of servings of food groups that you should achieve in the course of the day to make sure that your diet has a good balance of the spectrum of foods and in amounts that happen to click with your maintenance goals, for example. And so, there's many different ways to track, and there's many different degrees of comprehensiveness of tracking that different people will click with. I tend to, you've got a master's degree in nutrition as well. So like I tend to take it for granted that folks like you and I, through our schooling, we were pretty much forced to learn all of the macronutrient values of all the foods and in all the portion sizes imaginable. Right. So we already have that awareness in our brains, and therefore we don't necessarily need to track, because we already have that skill built in, and we can eyeball a whole lot better than somebody who wasn't sort of raised with that and trained in that. And so I do agree with you that a certain time period of tracking just to build awareness of the nutrient and calorie values of the foods that you tend to eat and in the portions you tend to eat them, a period where you are tracking everything, it never hurts. And it can always help to build an actual awareness of what you're taking in. And whether you decide to gradually wean off from that, or whether you just decide to track every gram until you're 80 years old and then you retire, that can be up to the individual.
Well, you hit the nail on the head though when you said it's skill development. I mean, it's skill development. And so that's where I just see the need. It's like, budgeting, like just managing your bank account, right? It's like you have to like be in there just paying attention. And the nature of our food industry and what we're exposed to every day is such that if we don't have any idea of how these calories are adding up, we're in big, big trouble because everything in front of us is geared towards being calorically dense, promoting endless consumption, and invariably contributing to way more calories than any of us need. And so it's almost like we have to be terribly proactive, which people probably don't want to hear. It should, like us wanting to believe that it should be easy and that we shouldn't have to take responsibility over our nutrition choices. And I vehemently disagree with that just based on the society of the world that we're living in right now.
Yeah. The environment for sure is obesogenic in both the intake side and the output side of energy expenditure. There's a lot of dovetailing and defaulting towards just eating more and moving less.
I mean, that's a nice segue into movement. And what I would love to talk to you about is the importance of strength training, but more specifically, the age-related changes in body composition. And so let's touch on the relevance of strength training, and let's touch on the nutritional implications of maintaining lean muscle tissue as we age.
Our muscle tissue, interesting. I believe it's Gabrielle Lyon who calls it our body armor, which is kind of a cool way to look at it. It's really kind of it's the furnace of metabolic fuels is our muscle mass. And so, just from a metabolic standpoint, our muscle tissue is crucial to not progressively lose, because then we lose our capacity to properly process protein, carbohydrate, fat, calories. We lose our capacity to use those fuels, as opposed to allowing the accumulation of the byproducts of those fuels to result in increased or ever-growing fat mass, ever-growing visceral fat mass, ectopic fat mass, and then the chronic diseases that follow that. And so muscle is really an underrated component of healthy aging. And this is because the focus traditionally has been on cardiorespiratory fitness, equated to cardiovascular health, which has been equated to longevity. And so the newer model would be musculoskeletal health or optimization, being sort of the driver and the puppeteer of the capacity to maintain cardiorespiratory health. And then you can affect overall cardiometabolic health positively if you have all those components in place, with the arguably the foundation of it being healthy muscle in terms of amount and function.
Yeah. So we need lean muscle tissue as we age. We need lean muscle tissue to support healthy fat loss. And we need lean muscle tissue as a driver of really quality of life as well. And we were talking about Dr. Mark Peterson, one of my colleagues from grad school, and his research on strength and strength associations to longevity. And we know very clearly that strength, that the two are very highly correlated around the stronger you are, right? The longer you will live. Mm-hmm. And which really shines the light on the need for us supporting lean muscle tissue as we age. And so what are like the main mechanisms to be able to do that through activity and through nutrition?
Yeah, the essence of the phenomenon of sarcopenia, or age-related muscle loss, and dynapenia, age-related strength loss. The crux of that is muscular disuse, or essentially either purposeful immobility or forced immobility. Immobility is really the crux of the problem. So a lack of movement, a lack of resistant joint movement is going to result in a gradual and sometimes progressive loss of muscle tissue. And when you lose muscle tissue, you lose the ability to properly metabolize dietary fuels. And then the constellation of problems start from there. And so with even just simple things, insidious things over time, as people age, they'll move less, yes, of course, but they'll walk 20% slower. They will take breaks and sit 10, 20, 30% more across the normal span of activities of daily living. And this isn't even, getting into a decrease in visits to the gym, right, and just a waning interest in the whole fitness and aesthetics thing that you may have had back in your 20s and 30s. There is a progressive decrease in physical activity that just creeps up on people. And then you see sarcopenia kick in. And it's worth mentioning that there are the accumulation of body fat exacerbates the whole thing, because when you accumulate excess body fat, you're creating kind of this, for a simple way to put it, you're creating a low-grade inflammatory state, a systemic inflammatory state that actually hinders the body's ability to elicit muscle protein synthesis in either response to training or in response to food, or both. So it actually does make it tougher, especially a state of obesity. It impairs the body's ability to have an anabolic response at the muscle level. So inflammatory factors in the body within adipose tissue and secreted by adipose tissue can actually compete with anabolic factors in muscle tissue. And so the sustenance of this sort of state of accumulating excess body fat and the compromise of or decrease of muscle mass, it results in a condition called sarcopenic obesity, where you have diminished muscle mass alongside of an excess of body fat. And this is something that is sort of a double-edged, sort of a multifold problem in the aging population. So they're burning the candle on both ends in the wrong way. Right. So the third component to that, which is sometimes added to those factors going on at the same time, is just poor nutrition, all the way from incomplete essential macronutrition to incomplete essential micronutrition. And the focus of poor nutrition as we age is people's tendency, well, through just having a crappy diet and a crappy lifestyle, but people's tendency to sub-optimize their protein intake. So the typical pattern with aging and older adults is barely any protein at breakfast.
Right.
It's kind of a meager marginal amount of protein at lunch. And then finally you get a substantial hit of protein at dinner. That's not good enough, because then total daily protein intake doesn't equal the amount that would support muscle mass over time. Right. And then the lack of resistance training. And then, of course, the inflammatory state spurred by excess body fat. All of this stuff converges into just really bad things, chronic disease wise and sarcopenia wise, as we get older. It's just one big disaster that people don't see coming. And there are simple, but not easy, not necessarily easy, but there's simple strategies to prevent that and age well instead of age badly.
So well put. And so what we're seeing is this just vicious cycle of metabolic derangement that occurs by virtue of moving less, eating less of the right things, right? Stimulating muscle mass less. And so you get this accumulation. So what we often see, right, is weight might stay the same, or weight might increase, but we know that lean muscle mass is deteriorating kind of year by year of disuse. So we're actually getting an accumulation of fat mass, as you said, is sort of has this metabolic stimulus to it, not in a positive way, right? That creates this low grade systemic inflammation, and that just perpetuates this whole vicious cycle. Coupled with the lack of protein intake and probably overconsumption of more processed carbs and fats and probably alcohol to some degree. And it's just like, on and on. And we see invariably quality of life reduces and a lot of the situations that we're finding ourselves in. So you said there's a few seemingly simple ways to be able to offset this. Do tell.
Yeah. It helps to understand that the way at the population level, the typical general population adult, the way that they accumulate body fat is not from a couple extra teaspoons or tablespoons of food on a daily basis. It happens in these sort of concentrated chunks from about November-ish to January. So the typical adult will gain about 1 to 2 pounds a year during the holidays, and they will sustain this 1 to 2 pound annual weight gain for about 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
And this is the insidious upcreep of body fat that happens by the time people hit 40, 50, in that range. And they wonder, how on earth did that happen? Well, it didn't happen every day. It happened because you didn't necessarily beat the holiday season annually. And so once you recognize that, then you can realize, well, okay, I just need some more awareness about what's going on during the challenging parts of the year and the seasons that may present these disease vectors that could eventually get me in my older age. And so that's one way to beat the upcreep of body fat, is to kind of recognize when it happens and how it happens. Because people can be totally Spartan for the whole year, but once that margin of the holidays hit, then they kind of cast everything off, and then they're literally 1 to 2 pounds heavier
and
ongoing.
I'll start again after the new year.
Yes, exactly. Oh right. Gosh, I've gained this weight. It's January 1st. I've got my resolutions ready. Let's do this. But then you are still behind the 8 ball annually. So that's one thing to be aware of. The other thing to be aware of is, especially parents, especially people with kids. So middle-aged parents with kids are maybe the most difficult population the most challenging population to affect change and good habits and stuff, because they're multitasking to a very high degree. And the things that they're multitasking tend to antagonize their goals, from the kids' food lying around to just rushing around to pick them up and take care of them. And then when you add to this the stresses of full-time work in the corporate world, on top of the kids,
Right.
you have the stresses of finances and the stresses of trying to balance life. There's the different things that you're juggling. It leads to decreases in physical activity. It leads to decreases in gym time. It leads to an increase in self-medicating with recreational drugs like alcohol.
Right.
And it leads to excesses in this direction. It leads to people mindlessly eating in front of Netflix in order to de-stress.
Totally.
It leads to people using food as medication and or entertainment and or a means to stave off boredom even. So people using foods in the wrong way. And that coupled with the decrease in physical activity, people need to just kind of take a step back and see, how can I get physical activity in order? How can I get overeating reined in? How can I be more mindful with eating?
Yeah.
And how can I be aware of body composition and how I can get that in the right direction? And how can I do all of this stuff and still maintain good quality of life? And it's a tall order. And this is the value of coaches like yourself, to provide a third party to help people manage this stuff. There are some people who are self-directed. They can get my book and they can get whatever you've written on this topic, and especially in the training realm, because you're not going to get training stuff from my nutrition book, and they can succeed. But people really and truly have to consider the value of having a real life coach to you make them accountable for helping you, as long as you're accountable for learning and sticking to the programming. So yeah, it's a tall order. It's very difficult.
It can absolutely feel like that, and justifiably so. But at the end of the day, is prioritizing, or at least figuring out what you're willing to prioritize and why it's important for you, so that you can create a level of awareness that allows you to accomplish, if nothing else, maintenance through the holidays, if nothing else, progressively and systematically increasing your physical activity levels, learning how to implement resistance training exercises, or having some level of a progressive plan that you can utilize that fits within your equipment availability, with your, training frequency, even if it's just some dumbbells at home to start off with, which we often do, or even if it's just a TRX strap, whatever it is, it's something. But like you said, is having the accountability perhaps is one of the most important factors to just get you to show up for yourself, even if it's extrinsically motivated at first, right? Because no one wants to get up at 5 a.m., especially with, the kids and the work and all of the sports responsibilities and all of that stuff. I get it. You get it. But at the end of the day, is you have to start to instill these behaviors that you can stack one upon the next, to the point where it does become intrinsic. It does become something, I feel better when I do this. I make better decisions, right? I can clearly see progress. I'm getting comments from friends. And so I appreciate how you tackled that question. And what I'd like to do, because I absolutely want to respect your time, I just have a few more questions. We had a couple questions from Instagram pop in, but my last question here is, I'm curious for you, having been in this industry for the time that you have, having obviously been rooted in the scientific evidence, as well as practicing yourself, and with clients, what's the biggest shift that you've had? What's the biggest sort of perhaps nutritional practice that you've changed your mind on over the course of the past 10 to 15 years, be it, nutritional timing, be it, I don't know. Is there anything that you feel like you've had, a big shift on?
Yeah, there's actually a few. So one of them is very niche-y and sports nutrition-y, and it was the idea of the post-exercise anabolic window of opportunity.
Totally.
So there was a time back in the early 2000s where everybody who trained with weights was taught that if you didn't have a quickly digested protein like whey, for example, along with a highly glycemic, highly insulinemic carbohydrate like dextrose or maltodextrin or something along those lines, if you didn't have it immediately post-exercise, then you're basically killing your gains,
Totally.
as the meme goes. And I've changed my mind about that over time, and my colleagues and I actually we've done both primary research, so intervention type research on that, as well as secondary research, meta-analyzing the studies of other researchers looking at this post-exercise anabolic window question. And it really just pretty much boils down to, first and foremost, getting enough protein by the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And the particular positioning of the protein doses relative to the training bout. I want to say it doesn't matter as long as you hit your total by the end of the day. But then when people hear me say it doesn't matter, then they automatically think, oh, so I can just eat all 150 grams of protein in one meal on the opposite end of the day from the workout, and I'll optimize my results. Right. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you don't have to nitpick at how close or far from the training bout that you consume your protein in the context of the typical multi-meal a day model, which is what the vast majority of people are doing. The vast majority of people in the world are eating 3 times a day or more. They're having 3 protein servings or more. And if you're doing that and your protein intake by the end of the day is at the sort of golden target that we strive for, which is roughly double the RDA, so about 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, or 0.7 grams of protein per pound of body weight. If you're hitting that, then the shuffling around, the timing relative to the training bout, we just haven't observed it to have any impact at all. Awesome. So yeah, I used to be a huge proponent of the anabolic window concept when it was pushed out. And that would include the inclusion of carbohydrate and protein, or the co-ingestion of carbohydrate and protein post-exercise to maximize recovery and growth and stuff like that. But lo and behold, the march of research showed that the positioning of carbohydrate, the co-ingestion of carbohydrate at that point is really only applicable and beneficial for people trying to expedite glycogen resynthesis.
Yeah.
And there's a subset of athletes for whom that is very important. But for dieters and people just trying to gain some muscle recreationally, I mean, goodness, have your carbs when you want to, when it works best for you, and hit your protein intake by the end of the day. And then seriously, like you'll be fine. Especially if you're in the fed state for most of the day, there's rarely going to be fueling issues and training performance issues unless you're running really high volume or an competitive endurance oriented type of protocol. So that's one of the things that I've changed my mind on. The other thing that I've changed my mind on is the idea, and we were all taught this in our personal training certifications back in the 90s, that you have to stoke the metabolic furnace with frequent small meals. So you got to stoke your metabolism, right? Because if you have just a low frequency of these huge meals, then you'll stamp out the metabolic fire. So we were taught that it's the difference between throwing kindle on the fire in little bits versus throwing a big fat log on the fire. You stamp out the metabolic fire. Yeah, that's something that I have not bought for a long time, with highly controlled trials comparing anywhere from, the high frequencies, 6 to meals in the day that added up to the teens. And when you compare it to an equal amount calorie wise with like 1, 2, 3 meals a day, and just really no difference in 24-hour energy expenditure. Then number one, you have to kind of eat your words after you told everybody they have to eat a minimum of 4 meals a day. And then number two, you kind of realize, oh, well, this is great because now I can accommodate the people who prefer to eat 2 to 3 times a day. They can still reach their body composition goals, as well as the folks who, prefer to eat like 4 to 6 times a day. And so there was definitely an evolution of learning in that aspect as well. And maybe the a more recent change that I've had is just the view of completely abstaining from certain foods versus forcing their inclusion to kind of get over your phobia or your issues with them. If people want to avoid certain foods, I just say, okay, cool. If you can sustain that and you feel that you can make progress and maintain progress with certain views of certain foods you feel like you need to abstain from, even though you like them, then great. Yeah, just do that. I've kind of lightened up my attitude on that because in principle, if you view certain foods as forbidden and taboo, then there's going to be people who will binge on those foods.
Definitely.
And so the default programming tactic was to just include those foods in the diet to kind of decondition people from thinking they're taboo. But I've lightened up on that stance and figured that, maybe some people truly can't psychologically get over certain foods. They truly can't psychologically control their overeating of certain foods. And as long as they don't feel like their quality of life is diminished by avoiding them, okay, fine, avoid them. Maybe that's best for you.
Yeah, man, that's super interesting. I appreciate you brought that up because I definitely encounter that quite a lot. And I'm probably of the, the thought process or the implementation of the former, in terms of saying, well, if you feel like this is something that you can't or shouldn't have, it's taboo, it's quote unquote bad. Well, we should probably implement it. So psychologically speaking, you realize that you can still make progress while having these foods, but definitely to the point of certain people, certain foods, like legitimately, you have 1, you have 10. Yeah. And it's just, there's no cutoff. I think that's fair and definitely gives me something to think about. So I appreciate you sharing that. But, and then on the other 2 points, awesome. Definitely something I've changed my tune on, and am just as guilty of the 6 meals a day to stoke the fire and what have you. And it's certainly a relief to know that people can get away, especially busy moms, so to speak, of 3 meals a day.
And can I just include a comment about the whole changing your mind on stuff?
Please. Something
that I'm trying to maintain an open mind about is the research on time restricted feeding, and its benefits on various parameters. However, I still am not convinced, and I just highly disagree with people who claim it's the superior way to go, because I still think that model, its main benefit is its ability for people to allow some people to control total intake over the course of the day. So separating time restricted feeding's inherent or special benefits from its ability to enable weight loss maintenance or weight loss It's very hard to do. It's very tough to do. So I don't see myself trying to keep an open mind, but I just from a programming perspective and an individualization perspective, I just have to put it out there that anybody who says we need to stop eating at 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. in order to optimize health, in order to optimize, cardiometabolic parameters, or in order to optimize, in quotes, longevity, that's incorrect. And that's one of the things that is really trying to get pushed out there now that I don't see the compelling evidence for, especially with certain populations who need to take advantage of feeding opportunities throughout the day.
Well, and what I'm hearing is the benefits relative to just creating a caloric deficit. It's like, yeah, you stop eating at 4 or 5 p.m. Like invariably, you probably won't eat half the calories you would normally eat for the general population. And so, sure, as compared to any other diet, like the results might be just as effective because you're creating a calorie deficit. But what you're referring to specifically is the promoted health benefits beyond just the calorie deficit. So, you know what? And this will be kind of the last question here, and I'll try and wrap this into one, is for the general population, there's so much information, Alan, and it's so much seemingly sound like information, right? When we're listening to people talk about early time restricted feeding and intermittent fasting and keto and carnivore and plant-based and all of these different eating methodologies, and there's documentaries, and they all to us sound valid. They use big words and scientific concepts, and they are touted as having scientific support. What's your recommendation to our listeners that are confused and frustrated by the nature of the conflicting evidence that they're constantly receiving as to what to do?
Man, that is such a good question because it's so difficult. I think maybe the first step would be to foster a high degree of skepticism of any nutritional information that is outside of the peer-reviewed literature. I mean, it's kind of come down to that. Now that makes it very tough for the lay population because they can't just pop into PubMed and start reading stuff and comprehending it. But just as a general principle, diet and nutrition documentaries are a small fraction of it is evidence-based, is truthful, is reliable, valid. But usually at least half is just absolute nonsense. Everything from game changers type stuff to magic pill, or the documentaries that push one side or the other.
Right.
It's all a bunch of hogwash, and truly this applies to most of the diet books on the shelves. If there's a diet book out there that claims to have the magic bullet and the secret, it's just the speculations of the author. It's just the imagination and speculations of the author. Extreme types of plans and bold claims are rarely valid, man. We have an evidence base. We have a large evidence base to have a grip on what is valid. Getting the lay person to understand that and grasp that and know those things is extremely difficult. And that's the best we can do, is just make sure the evidence-based practitioners get this information out there somehow. And so I'm trying to do my part by writing a book that is on evidence-based nutrition. Now, I'm not some superstar who shows up on Dr. Oz every week and can talk about my book. So therefore, there's only going to be this small population of people who actually get their hands on my book and read it. So I don't know, man, you may have presented the $1 billion question of how do we reach the lay audience? How do we teach them the right stuff?
Well, that's part of the reason why I felt like it was necessary to get you on the podcast to share your information, to try and, get the book in as many hands as possible, is because this is the type of information that people need to hear. And anytime that, it's like you said, anytime that we're presented with information that seems polarizing, especially with respect to nutrition and exercise, we do need to be immediately skeptical of the validity of that type of information. And it's not only just the validity, but also questioning, like, how does this even fit within your lifestyle, right? It's all good and well. And even if there was like this magic time restricted feeding methodology that would invariably help you tack on a few years of your life or improve longevity or whatever, would that even be realistic for your livelihood? Like, I don't know many mothers and fathers, nor children for that matter, nor busy executives that could realistically cut off their calorie intake at 4 p.m., regardless of how healthy they think it is for them. I mean, we know this even with just medications, like medications that people need to take to keep them alive. Like 50% of them don't consistently take the medications based on the research. So that's a whole nother element of just the realist, how realistic is this stuff even for you? So I love that people are motivated to want to make change, but let's take a step back for a second and acknowledge if and how this would even work within the context of your life, what you're willing to prioritize, how you're willing to commit to it, what you're currently doing, how much you're ready to change, all of those types of things. But I think a great start, Alan, is, for those of you that are listening, let's get your hands on Flexible Dieting book. The link will be in the show notes. Anything else that you would like to share, Alan?
Last night at about midnight, I broke out the fat-free Greek yogurt, the Phage Faye Greek yogurt, dumped about 6 ounces into a bowl, got the vanilla protein powder, dumped it on top of that disgusting Phage, made it delicious, and then dumped a handful of blueberries on top of it and thought to myself, if I bought into the time restricted feeding model, I wouldn't be getting this hit of highly nutritious stuff right now, including the protein that would round out the targets for my personal goals. And it just reminded me about how people buy into certain fads and compromise what they can achieve. And, dude, being 50 years old, I do think about how much longer I'm going to be able to hold on to lean tissue, and at which point in my life, whether it be 60, 70, 80, at which point is frailty really going to start challenging me? But knowing that I'm maintaining a certain set of evidence-based habits, including not everybody stays up as late as me, as you know, and not everybody has to have this nighttime hit of protein, but it's one of the tactics that would go against this early time restricted feeding model that's being pushed out for longevity. That I proudly and happily violate. I also want to mention, I just completed a paper on age-related anabolic resistance, and I'm going to send you a link to that you can provide for your audience, because it's and the interesting thing, it's not even an open access paper, but the publisher gave us a link to the full text that we could share with our friends and colleagues. And so I'm really stoked about that. It was just published, and I really want to encourage you probably read it already, your audience, to read that paper because it's really going to be relevant to older adults who want to maintain optimal musculoskeletal and otherwise health into into their golden, silver and golden years. So yeah, that's what I wanted to make sure that I wanted to add that.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think that for me, it's definitely a shift that I've had over the last, because I'm 43, but it's definitely a shift that I've noticed over the last few years of really starting to think about this idea of longevity and leveraging strength training and muscle mass throughout the rest of my life. And I think our listeners, whether they're not thinking about it now, they will be, and this will resonate. And so if you are listening and you haven't been thinking about this, I do think it's incredibly relevant for you to start thinking about how you're training now, if you're training now, and how you're going to be able to continue to potentiate that training throughout the rest of your life and finding the ways that work best for you. And that's so much of what I appreciate about this conversation is just that, is the individualized nature of this flexible dieting approach of figuring out the ways that work best for you, creating awareness, creating accountability, and then plugging it in and prioritizing it so that you can make the changes that you're looking for. So, Alan, thank you immensely for your time. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing in the industry. I'm extremely grateful to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you and to be able to share this with our listeners. So we'll definitely have to do it again. I know you're a very busy man, and so I'm going to let you go, but thank you again, sir.
Be very happy to do it again. And thank you for the great work that you're doing in the space as well, Ben.
Appreciate it, brother. Take care. Talk soon.